Man, so glad that you guys are here this morning. And we're launching a new series. If you've been kind of following us a little bit on Facebook, I put out a little video to kind of talk about our heartbeat behind what we're going to be doing for the next 7 weeks. But for the next 7 weeks, we're going to look at the book of Daniel in a series called Without a Country. Without a Country. And so we're going to be leaning into the book of Daniel and what it tells us about being a people without a country. Now, I think some of the stuff that was stirring in my heart, I just want to give some background to some of the stuff that was stirring in my heart as I felt like the Lord was leading us to look at the book of Daniel. For the last year or so, maybe longer than that, some of the news has been dominated by images and discussions about immigrants. There's been lots of discussion about Syrian refugees, lots of talk and discussion and debate about border walls, and even, outcries about whether there are children in cages and how we handle immigrants and there's this major discussion in the news. And then I don't know if you've noticed, but it's kind of gone, kind of disappeared because we're news dominated. And so some other news has kind of taken over, right? And so what was probably around all the time, a big discussion all the time is what kind of country are we and how do we deal with people and what do we do and what are the laws and all this different stuff is, as all that was in the news, I found there was like a tension in my heart, if I'm just being honest. And the tension is though I feel like God, I feel like I'm a compassionate person. I feel like I love people generally, and I'm a compassionate person. I struggled to relate to the struggle of the immigrant in whatever case they were coming into our country. I struggled to relate to the struggle. I struggled to relate to potentially what some of the pain might be. I had a hard time stepping into what it might be like to come across and have nothing around you feel familiar, like nothing. Like you don't even know how to get from like where you got a roof over your head to like the grocery store to get milk because they don't have milk the way you had milk. You know what I mean? It's not even the same kind of thing. Right? I struggled to relate to what would happen if maybe all the religious practices that you had, the things that were really important to you, nothing around you was wired for that. And just unsure of how to connect to how you're supposed to practice this thing out. I just really struggled with how to relate. I just didn't feel that tension on my heart. And when it was out of the news, it's kind of been out of sight and out of mind, if I can be honest. Like a group of people that's struggling, and honestly, I would walk around Conway, and I don't see a lot of immigrants in Conway. Maybe I do, maybe I just don't know it, but I just don't see them, right? And I just don't feel the tension of what the struggle is to be a people without a country, to be a people who have no safe place to go. And what's interesting is, as I've been kind of studying and looking at this, I found that the Bible is loaded with people who don't have a country. I mean, it's just packed and loaded with people. So just front out, I just want you to know this isn't a talk about how to love the immigrant. Although we need to love the immigrant really well, but I think what I was battling with is why don't I relate to the immigrant? What is it about my heart that I just don't understand how to relate? And I realize it's probably because I'm very comfortable in my cultural identity. Like I've become really comfortable. Like where I am and where I've landed in the world and how it all works. I mean, the things make sense to me. Everywhere I go, things make sense. Even if I don't agree with it, even if I don't like it, even if I don't want to be done that way at all, it makes sense. It completely makes sense. I understand idioms and phrases that are thrown out, and I understand the consequences of those phrases. I understand how things work with our social media, and it just makes sense. I'm very, very comfortable in my cultural identity. And so it was hard for me to relate. And I really struggled with that. And then I went to the Bible and I was like, it looks like the folks in the Bible wouldn't have any problem relating at all. In fact, it seems like everybody in the Bible would be like 100% would know how to relate. So why don't I? Like, why am I struggling to relate? And I realized that I might have forgotten one of the basic principles of the Bible for followers of Jesus. And one of the basic principles for followers of Jesus is that one of our core identities is that we are exiles. That's one of our core, I don't know if you knew that, but one of the core identities for a Christian, if you read the Bible, is we're exiles. And you go, well, maybe they them in the first century, they were all exiles, but we're not exiles. They were literally exiles. They were kicked out of their home. They didn't have a place to go. But actually, when you go to the Bible won't let you and I be exempt from being exiles. In fact, it commands us to maintain our identity as exiles. It demands us not to lose our grip on what it means to be a stranger and a foreigner. And I kind of got a little bit worried. Like, me and maybe a lot of people I know, we've kind of lost our grip on what it means to be a stranger. And if we've lost our grip on what it means to be a stranger, can we effectively walk out the mission of Jesus? Can I effectively walk out the call of God on my life if I've lost my grip on one of the core aspects of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, which is, this is not my home. Being an American citizen is not my core identity. I'm a stranger and an exile. And so I want to take this series and I want to, prove to you, first of all, you're like, well, that sounds crazy. I want to prove to you it's not crazy. So before I go to Daniel, I want to show you two places in the New Testament where you and I are told, commanded to be exiles. Not just these guys were exiles and that was kind of cool for you to look at. Oh, wasn't that an interesting story? Wasn't that fun for them? They had to really fight for their faith in a place with no country. But that you and I, as followers of Jesus, are called to maintain our identity as exiles. I want to show you this in 1 Peter first. Check this out in 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 2, I think. Got it covered up in my Bible here. 2 verse 9. And here's what Peter says to a people who are literally exiles. But I want you to know what he says to them. Because see, as exiles who get acclimated, as exiles who begin to assimilate, as exiles who begin to be in a place long enough, there comes like a choice you have to make. Like, are you going to put on all the clothes? Are you going to figure it out? Are you going to just like kind of give into the values of the culture? And here's what he says to the people. He says, but you're a chosen race. That's a beautiful idea. You're a royal priesthood, worshipers to God. You're a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim. In other words, this is your kind of identity. You're my people, and I put breath in your lungs to proclaim my excellencies in the universe. That's what we do as the church. We're a chosen people, beautiful because of the choice of God on our lives. We're worshipers and we're proclaimers of the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you're God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And then he says, beloved, and here's, you got to be careful. When someone looks at you and they start their phrase with, Sarah, I really love you. Be careful what's about to come next. Because when someone starts the phrase with, man, I really love you, I really care about you, I'm about to say some stuff to you, right? I always start, man, if you're sitting with me and I'm like, all right, listen, okay, and Justin, you know that I love you. You just better watch out. I'm trying to soften up the blow, because here comes the blow. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh which war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good works and glorify God on the day of visitation. In other words, glorify God on the day God comes through the sky, lands on the ground, and says, I'm God, I'm King, I'm the ruler of the universe. He's saying the Gentiles are going to honor and glorify God because you honored and glorified God as an exile. In other words, as exiles, don't get comfortable. No, he says, what? War against your soul. And keep your conduct among the Gentiles in the city honorable. In other words, you are not allowed as a sojourner, as an exile, to plant yourself, settle yourself, and go, cool, I can just fit in. That's what he's trying to say. You are a sojourner, you are an exile, you got to need to stay that way. You need to maintain that central identity to who you are. You're a chosen people. You belong to me, and you're among what he calls the Gentiles, and you need to maintain your identity. so that when they see you and they call you evil because your behavior is weird, and they call you evil because you have different values that are always clashing up against the values of the culture around us, and they come at you because you won't give in to the cultural values around you, and they go, you're an evil person, that when Jesus comes back and comes bursting through the clouds and gathers the world and stands over them as the judge and the savior of the universe, they will glorify God. In other words, part of the way that God is going to get glory in the universe is by his people standing in contrast everywhere they live. As different, as strange, as peculiar. We're exiles and strangers. That's the only place in the Bible where it talks about that. If you look over at Hebrews 11 is a great chapter, right? It's the heroes of the faith, the Abrahams and Isaacs and Josephs and Sarahs, and it's the amazing heroes of the faith. But check out how he describes them. Hebrews 11, chapter 11, verse 13. These all died in faith. Okay, they all died. All the heroes of the faith, they all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar. Having acknowledged that they were what? They were strangers and exiles on the earth. If every hero of the faith, and he says all, if every hero of the faith is a stranger and exile, who are we? Strangers and exiles. Out of sync. Not out of touch, don't get me wrong, but out of sync. Not fitting in. Not comfortable. Always a little bit different than around us. We are strangers and we are exiles. They acknowledged that. They knew that. For people who speak, thus made it clear. In other words, a prophet that spoke made it clear that they were seeking a homeland, and they had been thinking of the land which they'd gone out. In other words, they came from the promised land, and they were thinking, maybe that's where I'll go back. But check out what he says next. They were thinking, maybe I'll have an opportunity to return. Verse 16. But as it is, they desire a better country. As it is, they desire a better country. And this is not even in my notes, but if you don't desire something different, if this is good enough, if you're living your best life now, and this is comfortable, and it's great, and it's awesome, you're not going to want the better country. In fact, there's a lot of people who go, man, I'm not sure I want heaven, because they really like now. They're really comfortable in the now. And he goes, but they're looking for the better country. That is a heavenly one. And therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. In other words, God says, I'm honored by people who didn't see it, couldn't touch it, didn't know where it was. There were people who were strangers and exiles, and yet they put confidence in a better country, a confidence in a better place, confidence that I am not a citizen here, but I'm on a journey. Now, there are some responses to this that we got to be really careful about. And this is one of the reasons why we're going to study the book of Daniel, because the book of Daniel is going to flip how we think we do this on our head. Because here's some of our responses. So we hear that, we go, man, I'm not an American citizen. Praise God, I'm a citizen of another country. I'm an exile and a stranger, and I'm looking for heaven. I'm waiting, I'm hanging on until Jesus comes back. And so some of our responses to that is we isolate. So we isolate. We say, you know what, let's create our own little Christian subculture. We'll get in here and we're going to hold up together and we'll make sure that we make it, right? Let's get all together. And I grew up in a family that sometimes thought like that. I've been in churches all my life that have kind of thought like that. And we're just going to hold up together and we're going to make sure that we make it, because this is not our home. So that world out there can burn, but we're going to hang on till Jesus comes back, right? You can isolate. You can have no concern for public or civic things at all. You've heard the phrase, so heavenly minded, no earthly good. Why does that phrase exist? Because some people have heard these teachings as strangers and aliens and people looking for a better country, and they've heard that and they've been like, cool, I don't have to worry about anything going on publicly around here. So they're no good at work? I've heard it my whole life. The Christians are the laziest people who work here. No ambition, no desire to make things better at their company, no desire to be an entrepreneurial and start things, right? I've seen that my whole life. Just, hey, we're strangers and aliens. I don't have to learn the language here. I don't have to figure out how things work here. We're going to do our thing. And so they have no concern for public or civic stuff. And they try to, and there's an attempt to reject all things cultural, which is impossible. If you speak English this morning, you are deeply embedded in our culture. All right? The only people who wouldn't be embedded in the culture that most of us share is if you don't speak English. Now, we have different variations amongst English speakers, but at a base level, we are deeply embedded because of the common language that we speak. Our language comes out of the culture. The images, the language spark in our mind when we speak come out of our culture. Like if you use a word and it gets a mind picture for you, that's cultural. That came right out of the culture. You didn't create it. It came out of the community of people you've done life with and born into, and the traditions and the values and the practices of those people, right? And so you really can't reject all things cultural. You just can't. You can't isolate. You can't pull away. And what kind of people would we be if we have no concern for the world around us? But this is a way Christians have responded to this. But I think there's a bigger threat for us at Mosaic, because I don't think we're like that at Mosaic. I think we've got entrepreneurs, we got people in the community, social justice. I mean, we're going after it. We love the world around us. But I think there's a problem maybe that I maybe struggle with more, and maybe you do too. But it would be that we would assimilate too much. That we would lean in too much and become too comfortable in the world around us. See, I don't think at our church, maybe in some other churches, maybe churches I grew up in, the big problem facing the people is they isolate too much. Too much Christian subculture, too much pulling away. But I look at us at Mosaic, and I really like us. I like you. I just want you to know that. You're cool. And I think we like to get out there and work and connect and achieve and impact and love and speak in the public square. And we like that at Mosaic. We've got a lot of people that are leaning into that. And I think we've got to be a little bit careful sometimes that we don't become so culturally comfortable, right, that we begin to adopt all the values and practices of the world around us. Now, someone in the room, anybody in the room, could say, yeah, I don't do that. There's a whole bunch of cultural practices and values I don't adopt at all. But my guess would be because culture is more complicated than that. In other words, within culture, it has subcultures, and it has different kind of factions going on. There's reasons why there's things called a culture war. Do you know what I'm talking about? They're like culture wars. If you find yourself really entrenched on one side of a culture war, you might have adopted a culture. If there's some position that is so outrageous to you that anybody else on that other side of the position is a completely ignoramus idiot, and you're so entrenched on one side of a culture war, you might have adopted the full-blown culture. It might be a subculture. It may not be the overriding dominant culture, but you might have bought into an identity and said, this is my home, these are my people, this is the way life's to be done. And it's comfortable, and it makes sense, and it's rarely contested, and it's rarely pushed on, and if it is, you get uncomfortable and maybe even irate. And when that happens, you know you might have stopped being a stranger and an exile. If you're not able to float and move within cultural wars and factions, you might have become too entrenched. And I say you, by you, I mean we and us. That I might have become too comfortable. I might have adopted too many values. Maybe a one way for you and I to see this is we never feel like outsiders. Maybe if you can look through all of your life and you can go, I never feel like an outsider, you might have lost a little bit of your grip on what it means to be a stranger and an exile. If you never have to go to war to walk out you're following Jesus, if you never have to really battle with taking steps toward Jesus, then you might have lost your grip on being a stranger and an exile. Everybody has a tough time following Jesus in every culture because every culture is broken. Every culture has been infected by rebellion and sin against God. And we can look at it and we can go, there's beauty in it, and we can celebrate the beauty and also be a prophetic voice to say, but it isn't right at places and it's broken. And if there's any part of our culture where that's where we feel comfortable and that's where we land, and when we're in the culture wars, we just might have lost our grip on being a stranger and an exile. So we're looking at the book of Daniel because we're going to try to answer that, because here's a group of guys, 4 guys that we follow. And these 4 guys are ripped from their homes. They're ripped from their homes. They're nobles. They're from royalty. And they're ripped from their home in 600 BC, basically. And then about 585 BC, before Christ, Jerusalem is annihilated. So this is the backstory for the guys we're about to look at. The guys we're about to look like are forcibly besieged. The Babylonian army comes in and ransacks their country, grabs them, pulls them back, and then 15 years later wipes out their homeland. There's no homeland back to go to. It's gone. Finished. Over. And they don't know what's going to happen next. That's it. That's where they are. And so we're going to look at them because they're exiles, and there's an interesting way that they begin to walk into what it means to be an exile. I want to read you this quote because I think this is the big idea we're aiming for. Because I don't want to get lost week after week after week, but I want us to keep our eye on the ball. What does it mean to live like people with no country? Looking for the better country as strangers and exiles. I want you to read this quote from John Piper. Here's what he says. He says, "The greatness of Christian exiles is not success, but service. Whether we win or lose, we witness to the way of truth, beauty, and joy." We witness to that. We testify to that. We don't own culture, and we don't rule it. And I would add, and it doesn't own us, and it don't rule us. There's 2 sides of that coin. We don't own culture, and we don't rule it, and it doesn't own us, and it doesn't rule us. But we serve it with broken-hearted joy. Why broken-hearted? Because we look at the pain in the world, and we look at the hopelessness in the world, and our heart breaks over that. In other words, we're not folks who are strangers and exiles and walk through these streets going, well, it don't matter, there's a better home coming. No. We're people who walk through these streets broken-hearted. Broken-hearted of the pain and devastation and the hopelessness that we're surrounded in, and we serve there. And we step into that. And we have amazing flexibility because we're committed to not getting caught up and entrenched in our own culture. Or finding a cultural group and saying, that's my people. We're more flexible. We're more fluid. And so we're brokenhearted. We have brokenhearted joy and long-suffering mercy for the good of mankind and the glory of Jesus Christ. In other words, if we're going to accomplish the mission of serving in our world for the good of everyone in it and for the glory of God, we've got to keep our grip on what it means to be an exile. We have to. And that's what these guys do in the book of Daniel. I want to just show you a little bit here in chapter 1, and then I'm going to be out of your hair. But I want you to check out the amazing pressure on these guys to assimilate and to give in. To be an exile initially, but then to go, you know what? I'm in. I'm connected. This is my home. Check out what happens, chapter 1 in Daniel, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, the king of Judea, there you go, say that right, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and he besieged it. He ransacked it. He destroyed it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. The Lord, you need to catch this, the Lord sovereignly gave the king of Israel to the king of Babylon. The Lord did that. Babylon, yeah, big king, big power. God did not give him 1 ounce of the credit for this. He goes, hey, I just want you to know, big old king came in, ruined the city. I did that. I gave the people, because here's the deal, where you and I stand, where we live as strangers and exiles, is by the sovereign choice of God. Where you are at. Don't dare root yourself and say, I choose it, I'm in it, I'll do what I want here. You are there by the sovereign choice of God. He decided where to put his people. Because he has something he wants to do with his people. He has something he wants to accomplish with his people. And so he gives them into their hand. And the Lord gave them into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And look at this. And Nebuchadnezzar brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. Okay, so he's got his gods, and he goes grabs the stuff from the one true God and takes it to his pagan house for these other gods. And he places them in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded this dude, I'm not going to pronounce his name, he's a eunuch. I'll just not try to pronounce names I can't say. And what's he do? And he says, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family, under the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom. That's a very, that is very flattering, isn't it? Do you know what our culture would love to do with you and I? It would love to flatter us and to just bind into their values. You know that? It would love to look at us and say, you're beautiful. Don't you just want to do it our way? You're talented. Don't you just want to think the way we think? You seem like such an amazing person. Don't you just want to buy into how we do it around here? And so they go in and they get the best, without blemish, of good appearance. These are handsome-looking dudes. Skillful in all wisdom, smart, talented, with knowledge and understanding, and competent to stand in the king's palace and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. That's the culture of Babylon. And the king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate. He goes, I eat it, it's good enough for me, it's good enough for them. And of the wine he drank. And they were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of the time they were to stand before the king. And among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and I can't say that dude's name again, Azariah, of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them their name. I want you to see how intensive this assimilation is. Not only do they eat the king's food, live in the king's palace, wear the king's clothes, but they get different names. Different names. You know, I got a lot of Chinese friends. When they come to the U.S., they're generally given English names. You know why? Because Americans don't like to say Chinese names. I'm real talk. When Chinese students come to America and they have a Chinese name like Wang Wei and, you know, something else we can't pronounce, right? We give them English names because we don't want to deal with it. That's what we do. We don't want to deal with the cultural difficulty of saying their name, so we give them a different name. It's a way of passively and aggressively saying, you have to assimilate into our cultural identity at the base of their name. Right? And that's what they do. They take it all the way down to their name. And you don't hear anything from the boys yet. Nothing said. These are probably teenagers at the time. Ripped from their home, ripped from everything, taken to what at the time is the biggest city in the world. It's the biggest city in the world. The river, the Euphrates River runs right through the city. Pagan temples all over the city. The names of the gates around the city are each named after a foreign god to protect the city from evil. So that when the boys were brought into the city, they walked through a gate named after a pagan god. And any gate they could have walked through would have been named after a different pagan god. Temples everywhere you look. Nothing is the same. Nothing is familiar. Nothing is right. None of it feels right. None of it feels good. It all feels out of sync. So how do they act? How do they walk? How do they press into the promises of God? And how do they faithfully live it out? I'll tell you, there's two things they don't do. And they're the very things we want to do. They don't isolate. In other words, they don't pull together and, go, okay, we're having a little prayer meeting over here. And, make sure we're not doing that stuff right. We're not giving it. And they don't isolate. And they don't assimilate. Because those are the pressures. Isolate, it's too hard to deal with this stuff. It's too complicated. It's gross. Or assimilate. To be a part of what's happening around us. And so all this assimilation is happening. The clothing, the food, the culture, the training, the language, the studying. It's all being pushed on them. They have no choice. All this assimilation is coming down on them hardcore. And then look at verse 8. But David resolved. I love that. But David resolved. Here's what he resolved. He resolved he would not defile himself with the king's food. Now, in our cultural day, we're like, the food is where he drew the line? Like, that's weird. Like the food. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. You got pagan gates, you know? I mean, you got pagan temples. You got all kinds of stuff that's going on in this horrible city I'm in. It's terrible, godless city. And where am I going to make my stand? I'm not eating pork. It feels weird. Like, come on, that's not the place where we draw the line. You know, there's some other places where we draw the line. But see, if you understand what's going on here, you read the book of Leviticus, which you may have, I may not have. I try to read it once every year. In the book of Leviticus, God said, this is how the nations will know that you're my people. He says it over and over and over again. How will the nations know that you're my people? And then he says, because you're going to eat different than the nations. Is there anything wrong with eating pork? Jesus says later, Paul says later, nothing wrong with eating pork. Why Jewish people, why were they told not to eat pork? Why were they told not to eat shellfish and all that kind of stuff? They were told because God said, look at what the nations of the world are doing, and you're going to be distinct. In the middle of the nations of the world, the peoples of the world will know you're my people because you eat different. You sleep different. You work different. You have all these rituals you have to follow. And so Daniel knows, as he's being acculturated, as he's being assimilated, as he's being pressured in to being a fully, looking like a Babylonian royalty, and all of that, he's saying, what can I grab onto? What can I make a stand in that would show that I'm distinctly someone who belongs to God? That I distinctly stand as someone in this culture, and I'll work hard in this culture. I'll study hard in this culture. I'll press in. I'll even achieve in this culture. Daniel will show us. But I am different. I belong to the one true God. And he makes his stand at the place where he knows that God says, when you do that, you're saying to the nations of the world, you belong to me. And you're different than everybody else. Powerful. Because it's not so much that Daniel is trying to earn his righteousness with God. It's that Daniel's putting his confidence as someone who belongs to God. I belong to you, and I'm going to make sure these Babylonians know it. And it's messy, and it's hard, and it's complicated. But he resolves that he's going to step into that. And of course, you know how the story goes. You know how the rest of the story works. The guy has favor with the eunuch, and so the eunuch says, man, I'm going to get my head cut off if you starve to death. And he goes, man, just test it. Test it with us, and if we eat the way God has commanded us to eat, you're going to see that we're more handsome, that we get fatter. Wasn't that cool back in that day? Getting fatter was like the value. And so they were just like trying to, we're going to gain weight, we're going to look good, we're going to be strong, we're going to be healthy. The guy goes, all right, we'll test it. And 10 days later, they look better. Their complexion looked better. They gained weight. Well, that's just so cool to me. All that went really well for them. And the eunuch was like, all right, you get to maintain your distinction. You have to fight for your distinction. You have to step up in your distinction. You're going to hang on to that distinction, but I'll let you walk in that. And it says that they became the best out of the whole class. And they rose to the top in the king's court. And then it says this awesome little phrase in verse 21. It says, Daniel served. Here they were the best of everyone in the king's court. And Daniel was there for the first year of King Cyrus. That was the third king. So here's a little heads up about the book. Daniel excels in a foreign country, but he never loses his distinction as a stranger and an exile. And he's so good at what he does that he serves 3 kings. Not 1 king, not 2 kings, 3 kings. And he serves them faithfully. And what does he do? You're going to see it in every chapter we look at. He serves the good of the city for the glory of God. He serves the good of the city for the brokenness of the city. He's brokenhearted. At one point we're going to see that he comes to Nebuchadnezzar with tears in his eyes. And he says, if you don't humble yourself before God, God will destroy you. And he's brokenhearted over our pagan king. For the good of the people and for the glory of God. And the only way to do that is to maintain our distinction as strangers and exiles. So that's what we're going to look at. The worship team can come back up. And a couple things I want to throw at us. Just questions as the worship team's making their way back up here. But we're going to ask the questions in this series. What does it look like to be distinct but not isolated? What's it going to look like to be distinct but not isolated? What's it going to look like to be engaged but not compliant? What's it going to look like to be so engaged with the broken world around us but not compliant? What's that going to look like? What's it going to look like to be sensitive to cultural pressures and yet not controlled by it? Sensitive, yes, to all the pressures and all the rhythms and all the things that are going on in the culture around us. What's it going to look like to be sensitive, to know them, to feel them, and yet not be controlled by them? So I think that's what it means to be an exile. What does it mean to have deep love for the people and yet have a prophetic voice to the culture? To have a deep love for the brokenness of our community and yet have a strong prophetic voice to it and to its power holders. What does that look like? And then, what does it look like to have a faith that's trusting in Christ, trusting that He's working these things out, and to be faithful as people who can be trusted by people who don't even know Jesus. Because everyone around them, man, is trying to get something from them. Everybody in this culture is fighting for themselves. What would it look like to step into that and say, you can trust me? I'm a faithful servant, not a self-promoting, self-serving consumer. What would that look like? So that's what we're going to look at in the series. Because we want to serve the good of the people. And we want, when Jesus comes back, we want people to glorify Him because His people, His servants, lived in the way that Jesus called us to live. For the good of the people, for the glory of God. Let's pray and we'll respond to worship. God, we come to you as a people. We don't know exactly how to do this. We don't exactly know how to navigate it. We don't exactly know where to stand. And we don't know exactly sometimes where to accommodate. We know, God, that you want to use us to serve our city. You want us to serve our community. You want us to be distinct and yet love. To engage and yet not give in. We need your wisdom and we need your word to lead us into that. Would you do that in Jesus' name?